For the longest time, I didn't understand the totality of the germination process when I really thought I did. Guten gardening, everybody! You know, a lot of times I think we just think about the germination process in its simplest terms. That is, getting a seed to sprout. But really, the germination process is so crucial, so critical to the overall gardening experience, because if we don't get successful germination, and that's beyond seed sprouting, if we don't get a really good seedling, a good starting plant, then nothing's going to grow in our gardening and all of our efforts are going to be in vain. So when we start to understand the benefits of mastering the germination process, we start thinking about how we end up with better yields, we end up with more productivity, we end up with a greater percentage of plants that make it from the initial germination all the way through to maturity and producing for our families the food that we need. While at the same time, we can eliminate some of the problems that can occur during this process of rotting, of damping off. And so I think overall, understanding the germination process in its entirety helps to create a more enjoyable and successful experience. And today we're going to talk about some of those keys to mastery that are going to help you have a much better germination experience in your garden. Now, in order to get to that point of mastery, we're going to talk about 7 key factors in this germination process, and we're going to start off with temperature. Now, all seeds have some optimal temperature range for germination, and for most of them, it's between 65 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 17 to 25 degrees Celsius. However, there are some plants that like the temperatures a little bit warmer. For example, tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers like to be on that warmer side, the 75 to even 80 degrees Fahrenheit, for their germination process to be the quickest possible. And at the same time, plants like our radishes and our lettuce like that cooler end, that 65 degrees will be just fine for them in the germination process. So it's important to know the temperature at which you want to germinate your seeds. You can often find that on the seed labeling or even online, but also you want to be able to control that temperature as much as possible. Now, it's important to keep the temperature even as much as possible, and there are a couple of different ways that you can do that. You could have a propagator, which you can buy online. They're not overly expensive, or you can go with a maybe more cost-effective method, which we've talked about in previous videos, and that's a heat mat. And heat mats typically keep the temperature for those seedlings about 10 to 20 degrees above the ambient air temperature. And so if you have seedlings that need that warmer environment, that's one way to get it consistently there. And one of the reasons why it's important to keep that temperature consistent is if you have fluctuations in temperature, you're going to potentially get uneven germination. So some seeds might not germinate at all, they might germinate at different times, and realistically, the more consistent you can be in that process, the more consistent you can be in the results of germination, the better off you're going to be, especially when it comes time for transplanting. And you can keep an eye on the temperature using a thermometer or a temperature controller of some type. But if you can keep an even measurement over even a period of a week, so you know what that constant or consistent temperature is going to be as you're starting your seedlings off, you're going to be in a lot better shape in terms of overall consistent initial germination. Now, I think it's also important to note that no 2 seed varieties are created exactly the same. So while there's that optimal range, some of the seeds that you may be trying to germinate may need some cold stratification or even some warm stratification. And basically what that means is an attempt using the cold to recreate the conditions that that seed would be in during the winter in order for it to best germinate in the fall or the spring or whenever it is that you're trying to get it to germinate. A couple of examples of plants that need some of that cold stratification would be things like apples, or if you've ever tried to grow garlic, you know that you plant it in the fall, in the late fall, and then over the winter it gets that freezing, thawing experience, that cold stratification that actually helps it to develop then in the spring. And you can create those kinds of temperatures sometimes using a refrigerator or even a cold frame built outside. Now, for plants that need those warmer temperatures, as we already talked about, if it needs some kind of warm stratification, you can take care of that, again, using a heat mat or a propagator. Now, the second key factor in the propagation process is moisture. And I got to tell you, this is one that has foiled me many times before, because it's very easy to let the soil mix that you're starting these seedlings off in get too dry, and it's also very easy to overwater, which is one of the reasons why we like those humidity domes in the newest purchases that we made. And here's the problem: both letting the seedlings dry out too much and watering them too much can kill the plant. And so there's this happy medium of keeping them damp, keeping them nice and moist, and not waterlogging them. Waterlogging them can result in damping off, which is where the thin end, and you'll actually notice this in some of your plants, your seedlings, if you've ever seen it before, the base of the stem withers away into nothing and it just falls right over. You can also, if you overwater, get a whole bunch of mold or mildew on the top of the plant. And if you let them dry out, well, the seedlings themselves are just getting started. And those seeds have so much energy, so much in them that they're trying their best to get out there and grow for you. But if you dry them out, if you deprive them of the moisture that they need, well, those roots are going to shrivel up and your seedlings are going to die. Now, there are two primary methods of watering our seedlings that we use, even though I know that there are others as well. Our preferred method is to bottom water the seedlings, which means that our seedlings are in a tray with no holes in it, and we can water into that tray and it can absorb up into the seedlings. But it's important to remember, if you're doing that method, which is perfectly fine and actually helps, we've found, to keep down some of the insects, to keep down some of the potential disease from the top, it's important that the mix, regardless, that you put those seedlings into is nice and damp, nice and moist at the start. Because if you're trying to get that dry mix to absorb up all the water, you may or may not have success with that. Now, you can also water on the top, and that can be something that is useful, especially as the plants start to get a little bit bigger and you're past those initial stages where you're worried about the flooding of the tray. Because again, if you've ever seen those little tiny seedlings and you water too much, you can just flood them right out of there. Now, there are plenty of soil moisture monitoring devices for sale for not a lot of money. We'll put a link to one in the description so you can keep track of the moisture level of your mix. And once you've gotten to the point where you've set a schedule and you're consistent with the moisture level, you're going to be in a lot better shape. But that leads us to the idea that you also have to control the humidity level for your seedlings, because too much humidity, once again, leads to things like rot and mold or mildew. Low humidity is also a potential problem because low humidity can result in the soil mix that you're growing them in drying out too quickly. That causes harm to the plant. You could end up with stunted or weaker plants that aren't going to thrive, aren't going to be as productive as well. So in order to make sure that this part of the germination process is successful, we want to make sure that we have a way to control the humidity. And one of the things you have to keep in mind is that good circulation, good ventilation is key. And the way that we accomplish that here with our circulation and our ventilation is we have lots of small fans pushing and moving the air around. Of course, we have a much bigger fan that we use in our primary garden space. That helps to make sure that our air itself is consistent throughout the entire space. And if you're having problems with low humidity, a simple humidifier can be added in to improve or really increase the percentage of overall humidity to your growing space. And if high humidity is your problem, well, you can also use a dehumidifier to help pull down the overall humidity to a consistent level. A lot of dehumidifiers these days have a setting where you can keep at a consistent percentage overall. So that can be helpful in helping to maintain your overall humidity levels. And we've found thermometer, hygrometer combos are actually really useful for measuring both the temperature, keeping that consistent, and also keeping an eye on the overall humidity level. We also had somebody suggest in a recent video that you try a Bluetooth version, because that's something that you can monitor wherever you are and see if there's a problem even from afar. Now, if you've ever done a germination test to see the percentage of overall viable seeds that you're likely to have within a larger number of seeds, you probably know that seeds will get going even without soil. They will germinate, they'll go through that process in just water, sometimes even in just perlite. But our purpose here is to create strong seedlings. So our focus isn't just that initial starting point. Our focus is creating that healthy environment so that they make it the whole way through the process. So it's important to remember that when you're planting your seeds, that you follow the directions and give them the depth of the layer of soil or compost, whatever you're covering them up with, that they need, that it's going to help hold some of that moisture in. If you plant seeds too high, too close to the surface, ones that need to go a little bit deeper, they're going to struggle just as much as if you plant something too deep in the mix. So keep that in mind. And I said this already, but make sure you have a good watering schedule in place so that your plants are consistent in their treatment. So they're consistently at that nice level of moisture that's not overly soaked, but certainly not drying out. Now, I mentioned a couple of other ways in which we water our plants, but I do know that some trays have a self-watering system in place. It can be a pretty convenient way to keep your seeds at a specific level of moisture as they're germinating. If any of you have tried one of those types of seed tray setups, we'd love to know what your experience was and the variety that you used. Now, if you're making your own potting mix, one thing to remember, and this is just some that I've filtered through a strainer to make it nice and fine. One thing to remember is you do want it to be a good, well-draining mix, one that's not going to hold on to water and get waterlogged, because that is going to create that same problem with the rot or holding onto too much water, too much moisture. That's going to kill off your plants as well. Now, when it comes to the type of water that we use for our seedlings, our goal is fresh, clean water. So we do have to use quite a bit of tap water, but for the tap water, we like to let it sit for 24, maybe even 48 hours to let the chlorine dissipate out of the water. You know, if it snows outside and we have the ability to capture some of that snow and let that melt, that's even better. But we don't want to harm our seedlings with an overabundance of the chlorine and other chemicals that's in the water. Now, I'm not suggesting that you're going to destroy all of your plants if you water from the tap right away, but ideally, if you can let it sit for a while, or you can get a hold of some sort of rainwater or snow water, that's going to be better off for your seedlings as they're taking off. Now, I do want to say one more thing about the humidity level. As the plant begins to develop, those needs change. So it always makes sense, in our opinion, to research the different plants and their optimal humidity levels. And you won't always get to that best point, but it's always best to try to get to as close as possible to the ideal range of humidity as those plants are going through that germination process and the various stages of their life cycle. You know, I hope the fact that I'm spending a good bit of time on each of these is an indicator of just how seriously we take the germination process and just how important we view this for our garden. Because again, without successful germination, without the creation of a strong and ready to go seedling, you're going to end up suffering in your garden, or I mean, you could end up going out and having to buy each of your seedlings, which is going to cost you a whole bunch more money. Now, factor number 3 in the germination process is the lighting. Because the reality is that some seeds need light to germinate, some seeds need some time of darkness to germinate. A good example of that would be the wheatgrass that we've grown, where they need a couple of days hidden from the light as they start to germinate before we remove them and expose them to light. The key is to give the right amount of light at the right time for the seed to germinate properly. So understanding the type of light you need, the duration of light, the intensity of light, the distance from the plant you need the light to be, all of that is key to understanding the proper lighting needs during the process of germination. If you have a sunny windowsill, that may work for germination of some of your seeds, or you can use artificial light like we do here in our indoor growing space as we're getting our seedlings started for this process of germination. And I'm showing you a couple of our sweet potatoes here, which are under some of those artificial full spectrum lights. Now, the most common light cycle is 16 hours of light on and 8 hours of light off, but that can be adjusted depending on your specific plant's recommendations. Now, as seedlings grow taller and they start to develop their true leaves and that photosynthesis process begins, they're going to need more light. And so you need to adjust the intensity, the height, etc. accordingly. And it's important to monitor those levels so that you don't end up creating leggy plants, for example. And if you've ever seen a leggy plant, you know what I'm talking about, where they're seeking out that light so much because it's not intense enough, it's not low enough to it, they're not getting enough of what they need. So they reach out, they stretch, they expand themselves, and they get these really thin, tiny stems that aren't going to make it, not easily anyway, as plants, especially when you try to move them outdoors. Now, you also have to remember that a lot of these lights put out a decent amount of heat, and so you have to keep that in mind too, because you don't want to overheat and burn the leaves of your plant. So all of these pieces have to be taken into consideration when you're looking at the distance and, again, the overall length of time and intensity that you're going to have your light on your seedlings. Now, there are tools you can buy to measure the amount of light that your plants are getting and the intensity. You can also try out some of the apps that are available online. But according to the University of Minnesota Extension Office, if you're just looking to germinate plants and get them started, lights in the blue-green spectrum or just a nice balanced spectrum light will be just fine for your purposes of lighting. I'm going to briefly interrupt this video to do our 28th giveaway in our 31 days of Guten gardening gift giving.
All right, folks, another lovely group of community members ready for today's giveaway. Remember, if you want to be entered into the next giveaway, and we only have a couple more left, go ahead and comment on this video or on one of our community posts between now and the next video to be entered in to win. Let's go ahead and see what today's prize is. We've been having so much fun with the Winner's Choice Prize that we're going to do it one more time. You can see the list of all the previous prizes in this giveaway series, and you, if you're the winner today, get to pick the one that you'd like for us to send for you. Without any further ado, let's see who day number 28's winner is. That means we only have 3 more left to go, but our winner today is Rebecca Watson. Congratulations, Rebecca Watson. Folks, go ahead and congratulate Rebecca Watson in the comments, but don't say her name so she can be surprised when she sees she's won. And Rebecca, when you see that you've won, go ahead and leave a comment on this video. We'll be in touch, and we'll get that prize shipped out to you as quickly as possible. All right, let's head back to our video.
Factor number 4 is air. It's important to remember that seeds are alive. When they start growing, they actually need oxygen. The process of cellular respiration is actually really cool in seeds because they take some of their glucose, the sugar, and oxygen that they're taking in, and they use that to get that process of germination started. And that means that especially prior to the leaves forming on your seedling, that oxygen in the mix is incredibly important. So what you do not want to have is a compact mix. It needs to be well draining for the moisture. It also, because it's well draining, if you add the perlite, the vermiculite, it's going to have plenty of space in there for oxygen. It's not going to be compacted down, and that's really going to help those seeds get through that initial germination process. Factor number 5 is time. And this one's kind of underrated, I think, because monitoring the plant date, monitoring the time where you start to see your seedlings come through is actually pretty important in the overall garden planning process and to determine if there's anything that's gone wrong with your seeds in terms of germination. Because if you have a plant that typically takes 5 to 8 days, let's say, for it to start the germination process where you should start to see the greens, and it's been 10 days or 2 weeks and you still don't see anything forming, then you can know that something isn't working correctly. And that's important. If you don't track that information, if you don't know that information, then you might not know something's gone wrong. And I should also mention that we did do an in-depth look at what seedlings are best to start at what time in Zone 5, Wisconsin. And we've got videos for February, March, April, May. We've got quite a few videos there, and those talk about the specific needs, germination time, germination temps as well. So we're not just leaving you out there with anything vague. We have those written down and recorded for you, so you can check that out and see what I'm talking about when it comes to specific timing. But when it comes to our overall gardening experience, we want to make sure we get the timing down so that we know when our various seedlings are supposed to come up, so we're not stuck thinking that things are going great when the time has perhaps passed, or we're not stressed out because we don't see anything yet, but that's just because it's not time. Factor number 6 is the quality of the seed, and I can't stress this enough. If you don't have good quality seeds, the probability of a good germination rate and strong plants is going to be greatly reduced. And there are a lot of factors that can impact seed quality. It's not just about when it was harvested or how long it's been in the packaging, because there have been seeds that have been started and germinated well over hundreds of years after they've been found. That's not exactly that common though, and so you want to make sure that you're getting the best possible seed, the best potential seed, and you're storing it in a good way. The last thing you want to do is to have a whole bunch of great seeds go to waste because you've kept them in a really hot area or you've kept them in an area where it's freezing cold. So spending a little bit of extra to get a reputable pack of seeds, or of course saving your own, is better in our opinion than looking at seeds that are 15-20 cents for a packet of seeds that have been around for an entire year in storage and that some stores trying to just clear out. Now, I'm not suggesting that you don't go out and find deals on seeds, but I'm saying quality when it comes to seeds matters. And one way that you can determine the quality of seeds is to do a quick germination test of your seeds. You got a packet of 100 seeds of some variety, take 10 of them and try a little paper towel germination test. See how many of them germinate, and then you're going to get an idea of if those seeds are going to make sense to spend your time on. If I were you and I didn't know the quality of seeds, I would definitely try a germination test ahead of time so I'm not wasting my time, because even 7 to 10 days, if things don't go well, if you've wasted your time that long, especially in the shorter growing seasons, that long feels an awful lot longer when it comes time to try catching up from the mistakes that have happened with those seeds. Factor number 7 is proper sowing. And I've mentioned this in previous videos. I want to stress this point to you. There is definitely a reason why there are instructions for planting seeds on the back or front of seed packets. And the easy explanation for that is that if you don't follow directions when it comes to general planting, then you're not likely to get the great results that you're looking for. This means spacing as well. You know, not every single seed needs to be started indoors. Some things are directly sown outdoors. And if you're going to directly sow and have those plants germinate successfully, you want to make sure that you don't crowd them too much, you don't thin them too much. You want to make sure that you do your due diligence and understand the proper sowing technique for your seeds. Again, whether you're starting them indoors or directly sowing outdoors. Now, I want you to understand something from my point of view. I'm not at all trying to scare you off of germinating your plants. And I would imagine that many of you have had a great deal of success when it comes to the entire germination process, creating some really good, strong seedlings that have gone out and produced great for you. But there's a reason why people often go to greenhouses and buy their seedlings there instead of starting their own and going through that process. And that's because those greenhouses, those nurseries, they have this system down pat. They know the requirements for humidity, for the amount of watering. They know what that process looks like, and they do it in a precise way. But our point is that mastering seed germination is far more than just throwing a couple of seeds into a tray and hoping for the best. There's precision involved, and if you can be precise, you'll go beyond just getting moderate success. You can be really good. We might even say you could master the art of seed germination. Well, we hope you enjoyed today's video. Congratulations once again to today's winner. This has been a lot of fun. I know this was a longer video. I hope you stuck with it through the entire video because I think there's a ton of information, a ton of learning in here for all of us to keep in mind, to remember as we go through this process and become better at this craft of gardening. If you did enjoy today's video, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.